Welcome, everyone. I'm Dr. Samuel Eshelman Latimer here at Fostering Growth and Cooperation. And today I am interviewing Olympia, who will be speaking to us about relationships, attachment, and liminality. And I'm excited to have her with us today as we go over and just learn more about relationships together. Olympia, can you introduce yourself as well?
Yes. So, first of all, thank you for having me on today. I'd like to introduce myself to everyone. I'm Olympia. I'm a psychotherapist. I'm a founder of Liminality, and I specialize in attachment wounds, toxic relationships, and limerence. And I'm here to answer some questions today.
Absolutely. As I was thinking about having this conversation with Olympia, I was thinking about different situations with clients that I encounter that there's added wisdom that needs to be here to be able to better solve these particular problems. And so, one issue that arises that I want to start with is thinking about particular women in this case who have specific criteria for the partners that they hope to be with.
Mhm.
And this is a person who is a single um, woman identified individual who has specific criteria that they're looking for. And they are looking on lots of dating apps to find the right person for them. And they have a long list that goes with that. And they feel like in their core, they know that it's a little bit maybe too narrow and maybe they're being a bit judgmental, but they don't want to be. It's just something that they're sort of like drawn to this specific list. Can you tell us more about what might be going on there? And then what are some of the challenges that that person might experience in the dating world?
Yes, yes, that's a good, timely question for our modern age. I see this in my practice, and I'm sure you do too. Women in particular coming in having a long list of traits and characteristics and needs that they have for a partner. And most dating standards aren't really standards, I've been noticing. They're trauma management strategies. So I believe everyone should have standards. I'm all for standards, especially very healthy ones. But there's a difference between compatibility criteria, which is that emotional availability, that conflict style that is healthy, relational capacity. Are they really ready for a relationship? The five compatibility sectors, kind of looking into those. One is lifestyle, the physical, emotional, and intellectual chemistry. And spirituality is another
Mhm.
one of those sectors. And for those who are non spiritual people, that would mean shared values, an artistic connection, and just a general shared vision for a meaningful life. So that would be compatibility criteria. And then on the apps, a lot of people are focused on status criteria. So
Mm,
that would include income, someone's height, their prestige, their job title, just general aesthetics. What kind of car do they drive? So when someone comes into my office and they say, why do I keep attracting these low performing men, or why do I always attract narcissists or emotionally unavailable types? I don't look at the men first. I actually look at their filter.
mm,
So if her list is a very detailed list and she keeps meeting, as she says, low performing men, I'm interested in what that list is particularly protecting her from.
mhm.
So we don't choose necessarily from our list if we're dysregulated. We choose from our nervous system.
Mm,
So if there is this consistent pattern of repeating the same attraction cycle, oftentimes it's because she's choosing from an attachment template that's no longer serving her.
mhm,
And often a hyper specific list is really a trauma response. And
mhm.
it's just disguised and, masked as these standards. But a lot of the time, these standards are just impossible.
To really make sure it's this perfect person who will not disappoint or ruin everything, much like
Mhm.
some of what they've experienced potentially even in the past.
Yes, yes, exactly. And
Mm,
sometimes it is because they have this fear of repeating a past wound that they're
mhm,
still holding on to. And the list is a protective mechanism. So, yes, I'm all for having a screening based process in the beginning of dating someone, especially when you're meeting them off the apps to see if your goals and compatibility aligns. But when the list becomes just rigid or too picky, it can signal, like you said, fear of repeating the past, a need to control uncertainty, which can be exacerbated by OCD tendencies,
mhm.
right? That need to know what will happen. And so they kind of mold the pathway to have the answer at the end that they need. It could also signal her own emotional unavailability. Maybe she's not really ready for true love. And it could be her just validating a fantasy rather than evaluating someone's character. And you see that a lot with those who have avoidant attachment style. They are hooked on this unrealistic fantasy of what the one looks like.
Mhm.
Um, and that's just a way to self protect because no one will be able to meet their version of the one. Um,
Yes,
so yes.
absolutely.
Yeah.
That was so helpful because as we can see, there's so many deeper layers beyond that list that people are making, and really
Mhm.
where it's coming from is all of these different layers underneath. Even as it's an attempt to find the right person, how that paradoxically could unfortunately push people away. And I want to ask about another situation that people struggle with where that also feels paradoxical. And this is when they're looking for relationships, but they're coming across as more intense or with their needs from the beginning. So this might be somebody who they have this healthy motive of reaching out and they definitely want a relationship, but they may have a tendency to send three text messages for every one reply because they're feeling that desperation and that anxiety and really wanting that relationship. Now, the person on the other end, even if they're not intending to be mean or negative, sometimes can feel um, a bit repelled by that energy because they may not know what to do with it or how to interpret it. So, how does that person who needs the relationship but feels sort of desperate work on that energy so they can show up in a way where they're putting their best foot forward in relationships and people are really able to see the other person underneath, not just the anxiety.
Right. Yes. And this anxiety surrounding texting in the apps has definitely increased with people keeping their options open. So some of that anxiety might be a very natural feeling of noticing you're not being prioritized because someone might have a roster. And then some of the anxiety might be a bit irrational where you're being prioritized and it's going
Mhm,
at a healthy pace, but you might be self sabotaging by reaching out too often or having that desperate, clingy energy you're talking about. And I just want to highlight for people that desperation is not unattractive because you want love, right?
mhm,
We all want love. We all want to be seen
So true.
and, accepted at our core. So I don't want anyone to be holding shame surrounding this. It's just this kind of clingy energy is unattractive to people because it signals emotional outsourcing because you're coming from a dysregulated nervous system, and people can pick up on that instinctually oftentimes. And when they feel this urgency in dating, they are really looking for someone else's approval and attention to unconsciously regulate themselves.
Mm.
And so that's when people can kind of get the ick and pull back a bit. And it also makes people suspicious of the other person because they're picking up that this person might not actually even really like them. They're just, wanting any kind of connection, any kind of approval. And they could be just hooked on the fantasy of the other person. So the other person just feels, does this person even really like me, or could I be anyone to them?
Mhm.
And they just want to win me over for their ego. So I see that also a lot with people who love bomb unintentionally.
Mhm.
They're chasing a feeling and not the person. And love bombing can also have that repel energy.
Absolutely. Thanks
Mhm.
for clarifying that. It's interesting to me that humans have this almost like paradoxical need for both connection and autonomy. And so it's like that person's energy of connection and excitement in some ways might trigger someone else's need for autonomy, or even if they have an avoidant attachment themselves with that overload, then they tend to step back. And it's interesting because it's not out of the space of being mean, it's actually their default response to step back and protect. And so
Yeah.
it's that dynamic. And with the text messages too, sometimes
Yeah.
think like looking at those text messages just generally and not judging oneself, but saying, if this is a mutual relationship, let's try like I send one and then waiting until they send something back rather than maybe like sending four and then you get one, and that's sort of like that dynamic a bit that you sort of
Mm.
see that disconnect. But
Right, the
um
overgiving and then the other person barely meeting the same energy.
yes, at least within those mutual relationships too.
Uh-huh.
Um yes, thanks for
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And
Mm,
kind of what I also want to advise is that people not overcorrect when they're in those situations
mm,
because then they become inorganic and not themselves.
right.
So
Not the
they'll
sorry, 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 sorry.
Right. Yes. Yeah. It could be the sorries, that nervous energy underneath the sorries. Or it could be them trying to lower the intensity by playing these hard to get games. And those never really work out because that's performatively manipulative. And if you end up actually winning the other person over with that strategy, they're ultimately then disappointed and turned off by when the real you surfaces. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Um, so instead of playing those dating games, and some of those are quite the dark arts of dating games, you see them a lot in the bar scenes. Yeah. So I don't advise doing the dating games to overcorrect this needy energy because it's going to mean you creating this separate persona that is not authentic to your core self, and that will just be you self abandoning. Instead, we can help ourselves in these situations by building multiple sources of meaning outside of relationships in general. Just slow that fantasy narrative down, track the facts and not the feelings, and check any anxious attachment style reactions. So, one of them being allowing the other person to set the pace of the relationship so you don't get left behind. A lot of anxious attachment style people will do that. And so they don't have a say in how the relationship is going necessarily. They just kind of are the passenger in the back seat, being driven wherever they might be driven to. So, yeah, so this intensity then decreases when you feel really satisfied with yourself, your
Mm,
life, and you're internally regulated. So that's why it's really important to feel centered before you enter the dating market. Otherwise, you can really magnify the unfinished inner work that you have.
mm. Well
And that can
said.
cause a lot of
That's
unnecessary pain.
high
Mhm.
self-worth, a mindset.
Yes, exactly.
There's this notion that some of my listeners as well have also been struggling with, which is to understand modern situationships as well.
Mhm.
And we are at a time where we are letting go of different aspects of patriarchy and different scripts from the past that very much defined the way that dating worked and relationships worked and marriage worked. And as we're sort of shedding off some of those things, people are now able to construct what they want in relationships, and they have a little bit more freedom to construct that. And along with that freedom, it's exciting, but that freedom also comes with anxiety and new aspects that people are trying to figure out, and find community to figure that out with. So when we talk about situationships and also friends with benefits, one of the aspects that some people wrestle with is this notion of the balance between finding a relationship that is very free versus the aspect of also potentially um, experiencing more emotional love in that relationship that then can oscillate back and forth between whether one would have commitment in that relationship and then differences between partners in that. So tell us a little bit about what people are struggling with, when sometimes when they started a friends with benefits and then they're 5 months down the road trying to figure out what this is.
Yes. Yes. And situationships are becoming increasingly popular and more confusing than ever for my clients. Situationships are driven by that core need for relationship, to feel connected to someone, to get those attachment needs met, but at the same time, commitment avoidance. So I see situationships as the evolution of friends with benefits, and they are much more confusing to my clients than friends with benefits because
Mm,
oftentimes when you're in a situationship, someone will be courting you, financially investing in you, paying for your Ubers. They'll show a lot of romantic ardor towards you. They might write you long text messages. You might even meet their friends. So it leaves a lot of my clients confused because they say, she or he doesn't want a relationship, but they're acting like they're my boyfriend or girlfriend. So this person is essentially offering them intimacy without any kind of accountability.
mm,
And this gray area always benefits the person least invested. And the person least emotionally invested holds all the power. So it becomes this sometimes masochistic, sadist master slave dynamic
mhm.
where if one is hyper anxious and the other one is avoidant, it can turn toxic pretty quickly, and even turn into a trauma bond.
I'm
Yeah.
glad you highlighted the aspect about certain individuals in the relationship and how one may have an ability to detach more from the relationship in some ways, to detach more from the emotions of the relationship than the other person,
Mhm.
and that dynamic that that creates. And I think while that happens to a certain extent in most relationships, there can be some that are more extreme, the dichotomy there between the amount of detachment. I know one aspect of it along a spectrum with gender, and I do think this is very much a spectrum,
Mhm.
but more male identified individuals are going to be able to detach emotionally with sexual activity. And so then the way that this creates a dynamic, and there, of course, I mentioned the spectrum because there are also women or non binary individuals who also can detach more than their partner, too. But this can create this dynamic of one person having that desperation more toward the other than is reciprocated.
Yeah, and that's a dangerous power dynamic to be involved in. Yes. Yeah. I
Uh,
think the way that this can naturally play out in a healthy way for both parties is if they both have avoidant tendencies, but it rarely ever pans out that way. It's usually an avoidant with an anxious pairing because that's how it continues. Avoidants are okay mainly with casual sex. So they don't necessarily, prolong these situationships if there's two together. It's the same in relationships, right? Two avoidants together, they don't really typically last because you need that anxious glue to always chase after the avoidant when he or she
mhm.
separates. So to keep this ball rolling for years and years, you usually need an avoidant and someone who's anxiously attached to come together. Um,
In situationships where it is, if it's healthy enough for the experience between them, do you
mhm,
think part of the path forward, if there is a path forward, would be there then honest, explicit discussion about this dynamic and what they're
mhm.
creating versus other times where it might be too challenging, too difficult, and it sort of like ruptures over time? Would there have to be some, if it continues for long periods of time, some type of discussion to move forward?
Yes, for sure. Being very clear from the beginning that it's just casual and that if feelings do develop on one person's side, that needs to be communicated because feelings do change. There's studies that show that friends with benefits, if they sleep together long enough, they actually end up bonding attachment wise, which takes a while, even for romantic partners that are into each other to get to that attachment bonding phase can take many months, even years. So when these friends with benefits partners are finally attachment wise bonded, they actually most likely, the studies show, end up liking each other. So biologically, it's a strong pull where it's often their biology deciding for them rather than their hearts.
Well, thank you so much. I wanted to ask you about a question that I know is central to the work that you do.
Mhm.
And I have to say, this area is a bit new to me. So I'm really excited to learn about it.
Mhm.
So I know in your work, you discuss fantasy, love, and limerence.
Mhm.
And in the age of social media, where we can stalk a crush's digital life, how does this digital accessibility feed our attachment wounds and understanding more about this?
Yes. Yes. Well, limerence, which is coming from an attachment wound, it
Yeah, can you
thrives.
define that for our listeners too, the limerence?
Yeah, so limerence is when you have an unhealthy obsession with someone and they are inaccessible to some degree, whether it's through long distance or them being emotionally unavailable or them being married or them not being your sexual orientation. I see that sometimes as well, where you're not aligned sexual orientation wise. So you're yearning for someone who might not even be attracted to your sex. Yeah. So limerence is basically obsessing and longing over someone who you can't really have.
And
Yeah.
does it have this flavor of idealization too to it?
Yes, yes, you definitely idealize them. You think they could be your soulmate, your forever person, and oftentimes it's an unrequited crush. Yeah, and there's different levels to this. It can be
Mm,
someone that you see from afar, or it can be someone that you have a situationship with. You don't really fully know them, but you're filling in the gaps on who they could be or who they really are. And so that's where social media becomes a very sticky situation, because Limerence feeds off of uncertainty, it feeds off of mystery. And so you can now monitor someone's social life, 24/7 from Instagram or Facebook, without ever really building this like real intimacy. So you don't really fall in love with the person you end up falling in love with or obsessed with their curated identity online. Um, right. So, yes,
I even listening to this dynamic, which one, now that you've mentioned it, I have seen this dynamic, and
uh-huh.
I wonder how much it is related to also internal self worth, self
Mhm.
view, some of those things too. I imagine it's also about connection, but this notion of really
Mhm.
idealizing this person and feeling that they're going to be the
Mhm.
one.
Yeah, I've heard from clients who have intense limerence where it's destabilizing and they even have to go on medication for it, that they feel that if they finally obtain the object of their desire, right? It's almost like they're an object, because they've objectified them as this, beautiful being on this pedestal.
Mhm. Someone they could
Yeah,
never be.
right. Yeah. So if they finally obtain this object, they fear that they'll be seen and then rejected. So they find safety in that space between them and the other person. And
Mm,
limerence creates this limbo, this safety net of like never really having intimacy with the other person, just having the idea of intimacy.
yes.
Yeah. So putting their toes in this obsession, which feels like they're in love.
Hmm.
But
And this
yeah.
experience, I wonder if it also comes with imaginary conversations in the person's mind, just as they
Mhm.
carry on their own thoughts throughout the day, thinking about this person, imagining themselves having conversations.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Absolutely.
Yes, yes. If you have obsessive love for someone, you're thinking about them 85% of waking time. And if you have obsessive love disorder, it can be up to 95% of waking time where you're thinking about this person. So a lot of it could be those imagined scenarios and dialogue that you're having with them in the future for when
Yes.
one day you actually unite or actually are seen by one another.
Mm.
Yeah.
Very helpful, this understanding of
Mhm.
just getting a taste of what limerence is and the work that you do with limerence. I
Mhm.
want to also turn to one other um, modern thing to understand. And so many people today identify as solo polyamorous or choose to be partnered independent. And so this is sort of a modern phenomena. And from an attachment perspective, is this a healthy evolution of autonomy, or can it sometimes be a sophisticated mask for avoidant attachment? Really understanding this situation.
Yeah. So not all independence is secure. Yep. And not all relationships are necessary for everyone. So
Mm,
somewhere in the middle, I think. So we definitely live in this pro relationship society. There's a lot of pressure to settle down, have a family, to be perceived as normal. um, so, yes, a lot of people feel this pressure to be perceived as mature, stable, and even morally successful. And so they enter marriages without really knowing whether marriage is right for them. But not everyone is most fulfilled inside these romantic bonds, and not everyone is satisfied with living with a partner. I've seen clients come to me and say, I've done the marriage thing, I've lived with my partner, with my new partner. I do not ever want to live with someone again. It's not for me. I'd rather live separately and still have a meaningful, deep relationship, but in different quarters. And, that could be driven by some avoidant tendencies. But at the core of it, if they don't want to become more secure attachment, then that might be a good solution for them. Everyone
Mm.
has a choice on whether they want to become more secure. And if they don't want to become secure attachment, then traditional monogamy might not always be for them. And that is definitely okay. And there's also secure attachment style people who live separately from their partners and don't want to live together. And that is something that definitely occurs, although it's statistically less than the insecure attachment style partners.
Yeah. And I think
Mhm.
just the range of personality spectrum surrounding this is very
Mhm.
interesting because I do think that at humans' core, much like Dr. Sue Johnson from Emotion Focused Therapy talks about, that people do need others from the time that they're born till the time that they die. However, I
Mhm.
think that the degree of what that looks like can be such a broad spectrum
Yeah.
um, for people being content. And so, some degree of connection, some degree of physical touch, but it can be such
Mhm.
a spectrum in terms of what that looks like. And for some people with
Yeah.
very autonomous, independent personalities, it can feel potentially suffocating to live so close or to be so tightly in a bond that they feel trapped. And that is one
Mhm.
notion of human diversity that I'm learning about.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really fascinating.
But yeah, very fascinating how, like, for some people, yeah, they do need more space and
Uh,
then they're able to work it out well. If they were together 24/7, would not work.
right. Yes, it could be explosive fights if they have a hard time. Yeah,
Yeah, for
regulating.
sure.
Mhm. Yeah, and it's interesting to read Polysecure. I'm not sure if you read that one by Jessica Fern, and she discusses how many people are drawn to polyamory because of that, separation. They like to have their freedom and their space, but oftentimes it's allowing them to work through their insecure attachment patterns as well. So she did mention that anxiously attached and avoidant styles are more prone to poly. Yes.
Yeah, that's
So
very interesting.
these attachment wounds kind of shape our relational structures. Yeah. And some people choose autonomy because they genuinely thrive with this independence. But when I hear some clients wanting to move towards poly or wanting to move towards an open relationship, I want to know like what's driving that. Um, because sometimes it is fear that they might not be able to keep someone.
Mm,
Or that they'll just be cheated on. So might as well open the relationship. So
mhm.
they take away the possibility of betrayal trauma.
Yes, that one
Mhm.
could be hurt less if I if no one had to fully depend on me or depend and I depend on them, maybe I would be hurt less if yeah.
Yes,
Mhm,
exactly. Yeah, so that relational structure is created out of this fear of getting hurt
mhm.
versus like a genuine desire to have a different relational structure.
Yes. I so appreciate just the nuances of the way you're articulating it in this discussion because there really are so many layers to it. And sometimes
Mhm.
it's just broken down so black and white, but it's very complex and the range of people's experiences. So,
Yeah.
thank you so much for just sharing your wisdom today. I've really enjoyed this time together.
Well, yes. Well, thank you so much for having me. It was great to talk about limerence and attachment and how the digital age is impacting us and modern relationships, like situationships that are becoming more common. I hope this was helpful for those who have been listening. Mhm.